Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and I am still traveling post my travels in Japan, so I'm not in my normal studio, so I apologize in advance for any lighting or audio quality that doesn't meet the normal standard, but it's great to be traveling. And I actually had an episode recently about traveling sober with Teresa Bergen, who suggested the person who I'm talking to today, who had reached out to me earlier, and I didn't see that message in time. But all that to say, it's a small world, and shockingly enough, most people don't realize how small the world is when it comes to addiction. Almost everyone knows someone who is addicted or suicidal. It's becoming more and more common. And I always say that, but I also always say that I've had guests on the show who have overcome addiction after 30 years plus of addiction. So it's never too late. I always put that forward. And I'm excited to get into the topic today because our guest today, I was looking through some of her episodes and website and saw some truly unique topics on addiction that I haven't even covered on my show, such as sober sex and, talking about recently sober travel. It goes to show that many of us who have not faced addiction or dealt with someone who is addicted, we don't understand the full depth of how it affects every single part of your life. And so we're going to get that done today in this conversation. We're going to go into a lot of different topics here with Dr. Sarah Michaud. So great to have you here, and I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I want to call you Mr. Whiskey. I don't know what else your name is, but
All right. Don't call me
it's
Mr. Tequila. He's a different guy.
it's delightful to be here. My name is Dr. Sarah Michaud. I'm a clinical psychologist. I specialize in addiction and codependency, which we can get into. It's basically all about relationships. And I wrote a book called Co-Crazy about my experience with addiction and codependency. I also have a little YouTube channel called Leaving Crazy Town with my best buddy Finn. And yeah, and I like doing podcasts and talking to people about recovery and getting well and addressing challenges in our lives. And yes, addiction is everywhere. I mean, it shows no discrimination. I mean, I'm sure you just saw about Tiger Woods and plenty of celebrities. It's everyone. Everybody knows someone who has an addiction problem. So it's everywhere.
100%. I talk a lot about suicide prevention, and when I'm guesting on other
Yes.
shows, I often get asked the question, what are the patterns or trends behind suicide in the military? And I always have to emphasize that, it doesn't matter if you're a chief, an officer, newly
Yes.
enlisted, been in for 20 years, right? It doesn't care if you have a family or not. It doesn't discriminate, like you said. And same for addiction.
Yes.
We know addiction is not just alcohol abuse, but it's also drugs, sex, pornography, video games, working. We have seen addictions develop over time into newer, stronger vices in our lives as we
Yes.
continue to develop and create new mediums for coping, not always positive ones. And so I
Right.
want to start, of course, with your personal journey of addiction, where and how that started looking back now. Obviously, a lot of us in the midst of addiction don't even know that it's starting or has started. And I want to use your look back to help a lot of people who might not realize where they are.
Yeah, great question. I mean, the thing about me is, and this isn't atypical, but I got sober at 24 years old and I'm 66. So I got sober a long time ago in the 80s. And the reason I think I only used for 8 years from the ages of 16 to 24 is I got into drugs. I think I probably could have drank for much longer, but because I started to get into cocaine, which of course was huge in the 80s. I didn't realize it was still huge now, which I think it is. But at the time in my life, everybody was starting to do cocaine, and I had a lot of crazy experiences. I could tell you some with cocaine. But the thing with drugs is it costs money. And when you're trying to pay for drugs for your drug habit, then you end up doing illegal things. So then usually the law gets involved. So I've been in jail several times. I've been arrested. I had a felony at one point. I tried to rob a bank at one point because I owed a Coke dealer money. So I've had a lot of insanity around the drugs that probably if I was just drinking, again, I could have drank longer, but it took me down really hard. And especially now, there are so many drug problems with the opiates that, I mean, in a way now, and I have a 25-year-old, I don't know how old you are, but I tell him often, you can do drugs once now and die. So, I mean, it's just not
Right.
a good idea to get into it. And yet tons of people, my boyfriend runs a car dealership, and literally, I think 90% of his staff had drug and alcohol problems when he started.
Mm.
And recently, one of the younger kids and several of the kids in their 20s have kratom addictions. And kratom, like, is sold at your local convenience store. And so, I mean, it's really a serious problem now. It's available everywhere. I mean, pot stores are open everywhere. And to me, I had a heroin addict say to me one time that pot was trickier to quit than heroin. And I think because it's so easily accessible and you think it's not really that bad. And yet I've had clients highly addicted to just pot. So it is everywhere. And there's lots of theories about it. I'm sure we could talk about that. Some people say it's genetic, some people say it's not. It's about your thinking. And I'm someone that believes there's many different kinds of addicts. I don't think everybody's the same. For me, it was in my genetic line. My mother was an alcoholic, my grandmother was an alcoholic, my uncles. I mean, it was everywhere in my history. But I've also had patients that, I had a guy who retired and started drinking and became an alcoholic within a
Right.
year, or someone's wife dying, or so there's lots of different kinds of addicts. I don't think everybody's the same. The solution might be the same, but it's really about that underlying stuff. What got me into it in the first place? What makes someone pick up in the first place? And there's lots of reasons for that.
Right, and we've even seen some people who can drink alcohol and be fine, but their
Yes.
addiction to drugs is something different. So we do
Right.
believe, especially on this show, the individualized approach, not only with origins, but with solutions. In a
Yes.
phenomenal recent episode with Jimmy Applegate, we went over why the 12-step system it can be flawed for many people and how there are so many alternative solutions out there, what
Right.
we consider on the show non-traditional methods of
Absolutely.
recovery out there. And I have had the
Yes.
honor of interviewing a lot of unique individuals who are making a great impact through podcasting, through clinics, through different private organizations and nonprofits in terms of non-traditional addiction
Yes.
recovery, So I think
Of
that's so
course.
important. And that goes for all medical care, especially
Right.
with mental health. It's something we've seen people try to copy, cut, and paste, and it's not. And I want to go back
Yes.
to it's so important understanding the origins of it. You talked about the dangers of drugs increasing nowadays, and we know a lot about fentanyl being spread around and the dangers of that. And then also vaping, of course. It's so interesting. First of all, I know, especially as a military member, we get warned about this more because of the types of shops around the bases, which are vapes that are lined or contain traces of other materials that aren't normally considered the standard for vaping. So people have to be careful about that. But also, oh, and nicotine pouches becoming huge and different stuff in the military. But it's so interesting. I've done episodes about quitting smoking on the show because like it's still prevalent, but we saw a huge shift in culture where, when my parents went to high school, there were smoking lounges. The teachers and students smoked together. It was advertised everywhere. You could smoke on airplanes. Now, you don't see commercials promoting smoking. You see commercials that are for quitting smoking. With
Mm.
alcohol, you still have commercials pushing forward alcohol. It's interesting now with vaping, they consider it so different, yet so similar to smoking. There are ads pushing the promotion of that. And I just wonder if we're going to see a shift, maybe my children or children's children, where they're like, wow, you used to be able to, well, you're not even really allowed to vape in most places. You're not supposed to, at
Right.
least outside of designated areas, but they're going to be like, you used to vape and you could get it in vending machines and at stores, and now you can't. And so it's
Right.
interesting to see how cultural trends play. We've seen the attempt to outlaw alcohol in the past and how that resulted. And so there's a lot that goes into it. And of course, being safe is the number one concern for anyone doing this, especially as parents. A lot of parents, unfortunately, have had to face the harsh reality that you hinted at earlier. And I'll say it very straightforward. their daughters going into prostitution or other sexual services in exchange for money or drugs. And
Yep.
I think for any parent, that is the biggest fear. That is extremely dangerous, extremely harmful mentally and physically to our young women. And so addiction is, like we mentioned at the very beginning, so much beyond just doing a substance and you can't stop. It's, you mentioned codependency is super important. We'll get into that. And then also it affects your social relationships, the way you show up in the workplace, the way you show up at home. And it may not be, like you said, right away. I've had interviews with people on the show who were functioning alcoholics in a high stress performance work environment for years before they were caught. And with remote work has actually seen a drastic rise in addiction because now people can get away with
Yeah.
being more inebriated on the job or whatever it is.
Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. You've said so many great things. I mean, it is everywhere, and it really doesn't matter what it is. Human beings, for whatever reason, can become addicted to anything. I mean, the phones now, and like you said,
Hmm.
video games, all of it. And the tricky thing is, and I agree. I mean, when I got sober in '84, there weren't a lot of options for a certain, for many different
Right.
treatments. And now there are different communities online. There's tons of different people starting. I saw a guy this morning in Boston that has a gym, a sober gym, and he's like really into fitness for recovery. So I mean, whatever works is my thought. The trouble is, it is in my view, it's a mental illness in the sense of it's one of the few illnesses that the main component is it tells you you don't have it. So denial is literally the main component of addiction. And that's why so many people die from it. Because I've known plenty of people that drank for years and yet thought they were okay and then eventually got cirrhosis and died. I mean, it's similar to bipolar in the sense of when someone's manic, they don't know they're manic. And that's what addiction is like. You're the last one to know. Or when you do know, you're terrified to stop. And addicts, rationalize, deny, minimize. I only
Right,
drink
right.
on weekends, romanticize. Oh, it was so great back in the day, even though, 10 years later, they're losing everything. So it's a certain way of thinking that keeps you using. And that's what makes it so tricky.
Right, the rationalization part we've discussed in detail on the show. My father and other gentlemen who have been on the show as addicts sharing about, my father's a great example. There's always some kind of holiday. And
Right.
nowadays there's a holiday every day. You could look it
Every
up.
day.
It's National Donut Day today, so I'm gonna drink, it's a, so I've seen that before. Or I would call it downplaying for lack of better words. Oh, it's just vodka, it's not tequila, or it's just whiskey, it's not whatever, or it's just the biggest one I hear.
Yes.
I don't want to name any specific brands, but we've seen a lot of these drinks that are only like 5% or 3%, and they're
Right.
more like chill drinks that you have, right? But if you're having multiple of those, and that actually brings back a point I wanted to mention earlier. You talked about the abundance of drugs and types. I also forgot to mention cough syrup. You mentioned different pharmaceuticals and medications available easily. We've seen a huge rise in people abusing cough syrup and adjacent chemicals and formulas. So, terrible
Yep.
news there. And so, we know the rationalization, like you said, there's always an excuse. And some people don't even get afraid when they realize they're in it. Like, I've seen people who have overdosed go back to using. I've seen people
Yep.
who have been in the hospital and had liver failure, organ failure, and continue to drink, even knowing it is a death sentence. On the
Yes.
other hand, I have seen some amazing stories where people like sobered up, like, oh my goodness, I almost died. Like, I need to get my life together.
Yes.
And so it really is individual. Now, you got sober at 24, you mentioned, kind of like got crashed out and burned out of it because of finances and other stuff. From there, where does your journey kind of shape?
Well, I ended up like just loving recovery. I mean, part of the thing that really helps with people getting sober is community. I'm sure you've heard other people have
Right.
said this, having relationships, whether it's a group, whether it's a gym, it doesn't even matter what it is. But as long as you have people to reality check with, because that's the problem also with addiction. there's a saying we have where it loves to get you alone because then your mind can start. So it's really about having other people in your life that you can check in with. So I got really involved in with other folks. And then I decided to go back to college. So I went to college and then graduate school and just thought I would specialize in addiction. And yet, the interesting thing is, I was talking to someone earlier about this. Just because you put the booze and drugs down doesn't mean everything's going to be great. I mean, all the issues that were there before you picked up in the first place are still there. And then, as a friend of mine once said to me, yes, now you're not in denial about the drinking, but you can deny or rationalize or minimize anything else. So people get addicted to relationships. They might, I had someone who
Mm.
picked up gambling, someone else who got addicted to sex, someone else who started shopping all the time. So it can be, also you can just be switching addictions and still not dealing and addressing with the underlying stuff, which really is what it's all about. It's getting to, geez, what is the reason I'm needing this relief? We call it, we often refer to ourselves as relief seeking missiles. Why do I need relief? What am I trying to get relief from? So that's really the question in therapy is, once you put down the substance, what's happening with me? What am I remembering? What am I angry about? What am I in pain about? What previous traumas have I had? What's gone on in my life that numbing myself has become the solution? And that's really the question.
100%. Not only are the issues still there most of the time, a majority of them might be worse because of your behavior during your time of addiction. And
Absolutely.
I completely agree that you can get rid of the addiction and then downplay all the problems. Or again, we've seen, especially physically, the replacement of alcohol with sugar. A lot of sugar users have done whole episodes dedicated to just that topic alone. So I won't break it down too much, but we've seen that is very common. And one thing I want to put forward, of course, is yes, community for addiction recovery, but community with caution because you can meet great people who boost you up and hold you accountable, but you can also meet people who are likely to push you into relapse. Part
Mm,
of getting out of addiction is reforming the people around you, many people whom were enabling your addiction or a bad influence in your life. So I would say community with caution. We've seen, they call it what, the 13th step is when you date someone at AA and relapse. Now, sometimes people have great relationships from that, but other times we've seen, sometimes it's like fire and gasoline. So I would say community with caution is really important. But I agree that isolation is very damaging in addiction because it's just you and your addiction. One of the gentlemen I interviewed, his book cover was kind of like just him sitting alone, and he had a separate personality that was just his like addiction talking to him. So I think it's really a great analogy. And Dr. Brian LeQuanon, who was on the show, he talks about it like a demon doing push-ups in the corner. Like it's always waiting for you. Any chance it gets for you to go back towards it, it will attack you. You can't really kill it. You can just kind of lock it away. And we've seen people relapse after a year, 10 years, 20 years, people in their 70s, 80s, 90s. Like you said earlier, it doesn't matter. It's there. It
right.
doesn't matter what age you are or how much training you've done, right? Some people just as soon as they get a single drop or a taste, it resets everything. And that's not always
Yes.
the case, but it can be. And I think when it comes to addiction recovery, you want to be as conservative and as cautious as you can be.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, yes and yes. And really it's getting down to those causes and conditions. You know what I mean? Like what, that saying relapse happens way before the relapse happens. Well,
Mm,
what, I've had clients come in that relapsed. And when we look at it and kind of back it up to when did it first start, geez, they had a fight with their wife, or they had a fight with their boss, or they got resentful over, somebody at work, and the thing is, if you don't kind of resolve ongoingly what's happening in your life and your underlying feelings, whether it's anger or fear or pain or sadness or grief is a big one, or I think I said fear, it's going to come out in some way. So someone who's not addressing their anger at the wife might have an affair. Someone who's not addressing their grief might escape through addictively watching Netflix or whatever. It's going to come out somewhere. Hopefully, you hope they don't go back to the substance, but it's not atypical. I've had someone sound great in my office and then leave and go to the liquor store. And I'm
Mm.
like, what happened between now and then? Well, the thinking takes over, or they couldn't deal with some feeling state happening. So, addiction is sobriety can be tricky. I don't want to say addiction can be tricky, but meaning when you first get sober, I mean, when I first got sober, I didn't know what a feeling was. I'd go to a therapist office and I'd say, wow, I think I might be angry with my dad, but I had talked to my dad 2 weeks before. So a lot of times in those first few years of recovery, you might be having a feeling, but you may not even be aware of it for a couple of weeks. So getting more in touch with what we think and feel is really what recovery is all about. So those underlying feelings aren't directing our behavior. That's really important.
Right, and that's part of the reason why they say make amends so long as it doesn't hurt the other person. And I think one of the most difficult things is, at least I know with my father, when his addiction was very peaking, he didn't even remember half the stuff he did or said,
Right.
and we were left to try to deal with that and then also explain it to him. And I know during the peak of his addiction, it was like talking to a brick wall that was also a treadmill because the conversation just loops back around and around. And
Yes.
it does feel like you're in crazy town to, reference your work, which I want to get into here. At what point of your journey did you come up with the idea of crazy town and kind of, I guess, revisiting where you once were and wanting to bring people to there to also get them out of there?
Yeah, I mean, Crazy Town really refers to in my book, Code Crazy. It's because so many people in sobriety who are in relationships would come into my office and say, I don't know, he said this, but it makes me feel crazy. And so I started to think about codependency, which is really, it started with, Bill Wilson's wife, Lois, in AA in the 30s, talking about a woman living with a male alcoholic. But over the years and through the 80s, and Pia Melody and Melody Beattie and Claudia Black and all these, Jonathan Bradshaw, all these people who wrote books on codependency and being an adult child, growing up in an alcoholic family, and all the consequences, we really started to look at how does growing up in addiction or recovering from addiction impact your relationships and impact how you see yourself. So the reason we call it code crazy is, for example, I remember coming home from school one day and my mother was passed out in the living room. And later on, I remember saying to her, geez, it seems like you were drinking. And she said, I wasn't drinking. And when
Right.
that parent says that to a child, the child might say, huh, maybe she wasn't. It starts to create this doubt within our own minds and hearts about our reality. And
Mm,
that's what we call crazy town. So the thing about codependency recovery is if you're dating an addict or you're living with an alcoholic, very often what you say that you see, the person will deny, or they'll actually blame you. You'll say, geez, honey, it seems like you've had a couple of too many tonight. And they'll say, well, it's because you're such a, controlling person. Like they'll blame you.
right.
So part of getting out of codependency, which is my focus is external. My focus is on what you are thinking, feeling, or doing rather on what I think and feel. And the problem with that is I'm basing what I think about myself on how the world responds to me rather than what I truly believe. And the problem is, some people are going to like us and some people aren't. And we can't control that. We can only
Correct.
control what we are doing. So, very often, when someone gets sober, their relationships are based on their early upbringing. And so maybe they grew up in an alcoholic home and now they're trying to date, but all those old issues are coming out in their relationships. That's what happens in codependency recovery. We're looking at, geez, can I identify my feelings or can I identify their feelings? I have couples come in where the woman, say stereotypically, is more interested in the husband getting sober than in their health, and the
Mm,
husband may not even want to get sober. And whose fault,
right.
whose problem is that really? It's the woman's. Because if your partner doesn't want to get sober, it's really up to you to figure out what do you want and what do you need. And that's really where a lot of what I wrote about came from. I had a husband who relapsed after 15 years of recovery, and my life blew up,
Yeah.
and I had a PhD. I was sober for 30 years. I'd been going to Al Anon for 20 years, and it was hard for me. And I thought, how do people figure this stuff out? So yeah, it can be very tricky. Recovery from codependency is almost more difficult because when you recover from addiction, it's like you put the substance down. When you're recovering from codependency, you really have to look at yourself and start setting boundaries in relationships and changing your behavior in relationships. And that's not easy because those patterns have been going on since you were a kid.
Thank you for sharing about your husband, and I can relate to that pain and even to the woman you mentioned in the stereotypical scenario. As someone who I am available as an addiction recovery coach, I work a lot in addiction recovery, yet my father, my number one patient, is still in addiction,
Yeah.
and we have the least impact on the people closest to us when it comes to addiction, unfortunately. And secondly, what you're talking about is it's one of the most painful things, at least that I've experienced, to watch someone you love and to care about them more than they care about themselves, to want
Yes.
sobriety for them more than they want it. I mean, I've been in that position for years now, and it is very painful because it makes you feel powerless.
Yes.
And because of that, a lot of people end up as enablers, which is a conversation we can get into now. I stopped being an enabler, but I did so in a balanced way, because a lot of people will say, well, then I just have to cut off the relationship. What I developed was what I call, like, a lot of people say, forgive and forget. That's what they say. Most people don't actually do it. And
Right.
it's dangerous. A lot of people then will actually live out forgive and resent. And they
Hmm.
actually just resent it, hold it over their heads. I developed, I mean, I didn't invent it, but I like to say forgive and protect. And that is forgiveness with remembrance, but not resentment, and creating boundaries to move forward. So with my father's addiction, it got to the point where I love you, Dad, but I'm not going to enable your addiction. So, I don't drink with you. If you're not sober enough to a degree, I'm not going to come see you. I've had to cancel my birthday plans with him. I've had to cancel holidays. I had to abandon him on Thanksgiving night because of his addiction, and it is painful. But
Yeah.
it's not as painful as enabling them and making them worse. We can only control what we can control, as you mentioned, which is our feelings and our input to their addiction. But again, to be in that position of watching someone you love killing themselves, that's what they are. They are
Yes.
killing themselves. And it's frustrating when I'm like, Dad, why can't you just sit down and talk about what's really bothering you? And even if someone does in addiction talk to you about what's bothering them, typically it's only the surface version or it's not the full truth. My dad and many addicts practice lying by omission or not withholding parts of the truth, right? They think if I know my mom used to ask my dad, "Are you drinking?" And he just wouldn't answer, so he didn't lie. So or he would tell part of the truth. Well, I drank, but I only drank X, Y, Z, but leaves out A, B, C. So
Yes.
that codependency can develop in a lot of ways. You talked about the influence of the parents on the children in what a lot of, not to use now it's like a trendy word, but gaslighting and narcissism both play into addiction very well. And that's kind of what you're talking about is the now spinning things around onto you, blaming their drinking on someone else to manipulate how they feel. A lot of addictions create toxic relationships, but also just children, as a lot of experts on my show have said, are sponges for information, for experiences. And some men I've had on my show, they thought because of their father's behavior that all men just drank beer after work. Like you had to do it. Like it was a ritual. Like it was like genetic, like men have to, they work a job, they have to come home and drink beer. Or
Right.
that if they're a mother, they have to drink wine, to use very common examples. And so how we teach alcohol to our children, one, it's really important to have conversations with them, which I don't think parents have very often or effectively. But also, our actions speak louder than our words when it comes to that. A lot of people will see, and that goes into what I mentioned at the very beginning, commercials and media depicting like a lot of, especially for like weed nowadays, because it's been made so available. And some people will use the terms, oh, it's just a plant, it's not a drug. My commentary on that for a different episode. A lot of media depicts it as it's not a party until you're smoking, or it's not a party until you're drinking.
Right.
I've had people on my show, if they went out and they said they weren't going to drink, people said, "Do you have a problem with addiction, or why aren't you drinking? Why are you a loser, to use a weak word?" But
Right.
that's what it is. There's a negative stigma around it, and then they say, "Oh, well, at least you smoke, right?" It's like, no, I don't smoke. Why do I have to do one of those? It becomes such a standard. I blame media for a lot of high school and college drinking because a lot of shows and movies will easily show underage drinking and parties, and they encourage it. They
Right.
encourage it whether they intend to or not, which I think they do because they get money out of it. But that's the sad reality of it is, the adults in our lives, whether it's family, friends, mentors, or these people online, are really influencing and shaping our beliefs about alcohol, when we're too young to even understand it.
Yes. Absolutely. You said so many great things. I wanted to write some stuff down. I didn't want to forget. Um, Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The thing about alcoholism and addiction is it really ruins families. It causes great pain. It causes great pain in kids, in partners. And you said it, we are powerless over our relatives, our loved ones' addiction. And the trouble with enabling behaviors, and this is what I feel so passionate about with the codependency, is very often, the codependent woman would come in with the husband or whatever, and she'd be the victim because she'd have suffered through 15 years of her husband's alcoholism, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying she isn't victimized, but I also want to say, she makes choices. And what
Mm,
I tried to do with my work was say, look, both people have a part in this. They're different parts. So, the thing about enabling is it doesn't work. I mean, the thing about codependency is we live in this delusion that if I focus on my dad or my son or my husband and I try to fix or change or save them or control them, they're going to get better. But it's really not even about that. What it is about is I'm trying to fix or change or save them because I feel uncomfortable. It's not even about them, it's about me. And so when I bring it back to me, then I can get some power and some agency about, okay, what's best for me is ultimately what's best for them. So
mm,
if I have a mom, my mom was an alcoholic. If I have a mother who, when I go over there, I drink with her because I'm afraid to set a boundary, that's not going to help her. It's not going to help me. If I say to her mom, which I did, similar to you. I said, I can't speak with you at night. I can talk to you in the morning on the
mm,
phone,
right.
but you're usually under the influence after 5 o'clock. She would have feelings about it and get angry, but that's about her. That's nothing to do with me. That's about her manipulation, her upset. So when I take care of myself, it helps both of us. And that's the really tricky part when I don't focus on how am I going to not participate in this person's addiction, I'm really making it worse. And that's the real tragedy is not only do they get worse because I haven't set a limit, I get worse. Because when I'm neglecting my own needs and dismissing myself, I get resentful, I get anxious, I start having mental issues, I might start a substance. It doesn't help either person. And so often, when someone finally asks someone to leave or says, I'm not going to date you anymore, they end up, not always, finally having a consequence for their behavior. And they have more of a chance of getting sober than if I don't do that. So, I mean, I feel really passionate about not enabling people. And the thing is, what you said, the problem is it's a pattern of behavior and it's scary because people believe if I set a limit, say with my child, they might die. And you know what? That's true. If I say to them, you need to leave, they might leave and they might overdose. But the thing is, that's not because I asked them to leave, it's
Mm,
because they picked up a drug. It's got nothing to do with me asking them to leave. You know, I've had parents say, well, I'm just going to let them use in the house. Well, and then a kid died in the basement. So
mm,
it's like, enabling
right.
doesn't help anybody. It's not what you do that makes the addict do anything. It's you're doing it for you. And ultimately, we hope it'll help the addict. But it's codependency, by the way, isn't just with addicts or alcoholics. We can be codependent with anybody,
Hmm.
very often with parents and children. And that's a whole other episode because
Right.
that's
In
also
relationships.
yeah, and relationships. I mean, over functioning mothers these days. And, you know, I read this great quote and it said, if you keep packing your child's backpack, they're going to start believing they can't do it. And that's really, to
Mm,
me, the real saying of enabling. And it can be packing your kid's backpack and can be calling your husband's boss because they're drunk. It can be anything. Let people have their own losses and consequences because you're not doing them any favors by saving them.
right. And a former guest on
Yeah,
the show actually spoke about this in terms of a pain tolerance, that addicts have a much higher pain tolerance for consequences than people who are not addicted do. And what she meant
got it.
by that, which we've kind of discussed already, is we've seen addicts get DUIs, go to jail, go to prison, whatever it is, lose relationships, lose their job, and still continue to use. She said, but
Yes.
you need them to rock bottom to come back. And I like Ryan Penley, Man Up, Sober Up. He talked about addiction recovery as archery. He said the best part he feels, at least in his perspective from what he went through, was that the further down rock bottom he went, the stronger the force of recovery was for him, at least from going to
Mm.
nothing to success. He said, look at it like pulling a drawstring, not intentionally, right? Don't be like, okay, let me rock bottom myself so hard I sprint to the top. That's not how it works.
Right.
But I think it is that pain tolerance is so high, we need to let them face the consequences. But again, it's our nature as good people, right? At least what we think is being good, to protect one
Yes.
another, And so I
Yes.
think it is such a difficult position to be in, especially as a parent.
So hard.
So many parents would die for their children or kill for their children, right? So letting them face the consequences. And it's
So
hard
hard.
to, I think, with drinking and drugs because it's not just their lives. They could get behind the wheel and kill other people. And I think that's the
Absolutely.
scariest part. But again, that's not on, at the end of the day, it's their choice, right? And I think that a lot of the research, unfortunately, a lot of the conversations of addiction are pushing this idea that it's not the addict's fault or choice. And this was actually a disagreement on my show because I had a gentleman say it was
Ah,
not a moral decision, but the gentleman chose to start consuming massive amounts of cough syrup because he said I knew it would get me where I needed to be faster than drinking a couple beers. That's a moral decision, that right there. So, I mean, I know it's a huge debate topic between genetics and environmental factors, but at the end of the day, we choose to drink or do drugs, right? I'm not saying that people don't get tricked or traced. I've had people on the show who someone gave them something and didn't tell them what
ah,
was in it, and but that goes back to, this has been an issue for a long time, roofing, right? We get that education pretty young, and that goes for not just open drinks at a bar, but anything. I mean, I'm very selective nowadays about what I eat and drink from anyone, even close friends and family at parties.
right.
Like I have to ask every party I go to, are these brownies brownies? Or are they? brownies. Like that's the number one concern. Like I don't trust no brownies anymore, People put all kinds of stuff in them nowadays, so it's
I
just
bet.
really sad. And
Yeah.
I want to get into your website on its own landing page is pretty extensive, but if you click to the sober curator, I mean, talk about a lot of stuff right there. I'd love to unpack that because I think this is a huge treasure trove and plethora of resources for people.
Yeah, I mean, the Sober Curator is amazing. It's an online sober magazine, but it's really a sober lifestyle magazine. Um, Elise Bryson, who started it, again, she's had interviewed tons of people and articles on lots of people, and she has no perspective on what's the best way to get sober. It's really about having a great sober life. In fact, this is a t-shirt of hers and on the back it says something like drinking doesn't look good or never looks so bad or something like that because she's got these mottos. And so we do a bunch of reviews of all kinds of literature, books, movies, TV shows. There are reviews on everything, podcasts, and then just articles on mental health, articles on travel, articles on sobriety and sports, articles on different NA beers and wines. I mean, it's really amazing. Articles on codependency. I wrote an article called The Golden Bachelorette on dating in my 60s. I mean, there's everything on there. So anybody could check it out and find something they would relate to. It's really a great resource for anybody looking for recovery. Absolutely. And I have a website just on codependency and all the podcasts I've done. And I've been on a channel called Therapy in a Nutshell, which is a huge, YouTube channel. And I've done some videos with her on codependency, anxiety, anger, the ninth step. So that's another resource if people are looking for some, just YouTube stuff.
That's all amazing. And you mentioned, dating in your 60s. What website link do we click to find your profile for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the article, if you type in Sober Curator, the Golden Bachelorette, you will find the article. Yeah, I mean, it's a great article and it's funny. I mean, look, I've had a lot of experience. I dated a lot in my sobriety. So, yeah, that's a great article. If you go to my website, there's links to a bunch of different things. So, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the channel, we talk about a lot on the Leaving Crazy Town channel, anything codependency, a lot of things addiction, but a lot of it is we tell stories, funny stories from our own experiences. So anybody can look that up at Leaving Crazy Town with Finn and Sarah.
Right. And these funny stories are not to glamorize or encourage drinking or drugs, but to
Not at
build some
all.
relatability, of course.
Absolutely. No, we definitely do not. Yeah, we don't promote drinking or drugging. Absolutely not.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, like you mentioned, your website has a ton of great information. I think this episode has had a lot of great insights in it as well. What would be your final message to everyone as we close off here?
I would say anybody can get sober and anybody can heal from codependency. To me, I always say what you need is willingness. And the other thing I would use is when we do interventions with people, it's always about the facts. So if you're trying to figure out if you have an addiction problem or a friend is trying to figure this out or you have a codependency issue, I would list the facts because the thing is, facts don't lie. And when you do interventions with people, typically when you get the family together, you don't have people getting like super emotional and saying, "Oh, I wish you would stop drinking." You have someone say, "Dad, you forgot to pick me up at school 3 days last week." So you stick with facts. And facts usually get through to people with an addiction problem. Feelings don't, facts do. So if you're struggling with a relationship, I do the same thing. Write down the facts. Because again, we can rationalize anything. I got to give you
Hmm.
this quick example. I had a client who said he was sober. He was 3 months sober and he was going to go to a wedding on a weekend. And he came in the following week and said he remained sober. And then during, like in the middle of the session, he had said he had a beer. And I was like, Scott, stop. What? I thought you had said you got through the wedding and you were sober. And he goes, Sarah, beer and wine aren't alcohol.
You
So
know,
in his
that's a
mind,
very common one I've heard.
yes, and so that's what I mean, though, by denial and rationalization. We can deny and rationalize anything. So I would ask, try to ask for help from someone who knows something. Call Mr. Whiskey, me, my email's on my website. You can always email me if you want some reality. It's really, you're worth it, And the funny thing is, when I worked at this pretty well-known psych hospital around here, the people that I thought were going to remain sober and worked their butt off in treatment weren't always the ones that did.
Mm.
Sometimes it was the people that really didn't even seem like they were into it. And you know what? They surprised me 15 years later when I run into them. So anybody can stop drinking and drugging. It's really just caring enough about yourself and having a tiny bit of willingness.
Amen to that. It's never too
Yeah,
late. And I know I'm one of the only family members left who has hope in my father. And I think it's really important for us to have hope in them because oftentimes they don't have hope
absolutely.
in themselves. And you talked about isolation, and sometimes just our hope in being there, even with boundaries, is so much more than keeping them alone. You talked about rationalization. Yes, we've seen political agendas, genocide. We've seen a lot of things rationalized, and a lot of addicts on my show have rationalized the idea of it's better to have a few drinks before I go into court than to show up shaky and with withdrawals. And it's people can
Right.
rationalize anything, like you said,
They
and
can
so I
rationalize.
think it's really important to approach it with logic, which is sometimes hard to get through to an addict, but I think it is really important. Nowadays, we see a huge culture emphasizing feelings matter more than facts, but at the
Right.
end of the day, facts are important and rigid, and they, will get us to where we need to be. I want everyone to check out your website, like you mentioned, ton of great resources. I think one of the amazing things is, like we mentioned, there are so many ways to recover now. So if you're listening to this and you said, but AA failed me, or I didn't want to be with AA, then start light with podcasts or articles. There's a lot of
Yes.
things and tools and resources out there to
Yes.
help sobriety. And I want to share a Bible quote as well. I think it's amazing when that says, wine is a mocker and beer is a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is a fool, fool being morally flawed person. And yeah, it says right there, wine and beer do count. Alcoholics always know the percentage of drinks, and it's not a game of percentage. All alcohol is alcohol, right? Just like any amount of radiation exposure increases your chance for cancer, right? If someone told you you had one cell of cancer or 20, it doesn't matter what percentage, right? It is
That's right.
dangerous and killing you. Same with alcohol and drugs. Don't try to
Yes.
rationalize it by numbers, right? Every chance you're taking is a percentage chance of losing your life, not just with physical death, but spiritually and everything around you. So, Dr. Sarah Michaud, I'm so glad to host you. It's an honor to host you and to know that there are so many people out there trying to, you know, help people leave this crazy town in this crazy world.
Yes. You got it. A pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.